April was full of energy and excitement, and the connection between them seemed stronger than ever. The fun they had shared the day before must have really added to the moment, as they both felt completely in tune with each other. Tim mentioned how the college guys seemed interested in April, and it amused them both. The playful teasing and lighthearted talk only brought them closer. By the next morning, they were both so tired that they decided to skip their usual breakfast stop and catch up on sleep instead. Later, as they got ready for the day, Tim brought up the previous night, mentioning how much they had enjoyed it. He lightly joked about noticing some younger guys while they were out, hoping to continue the fun conversation from the night before. But April's response surprised him. "Tim," she said with a bit of hesitation, "last night was really amazing. I'm not gonna lie, teasing those guys did add some excitement, and I know we both enjoyed it." She paused, frowning slightly. "But that was just for fun between us, you know? I don't want you to think it's anything more than that. I love spicing things up for us, but that's where it ends. I'm not walking around thinking about actually doing anything with anyone else. We have a son that age, and it would just feel wrong." Seeing Tim's reaction, she softened her tone. "Babe, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. The fun we have is great, and I really enjoy it too, but it's all just part of keeping things exciting between us. I only want to be with you." Tim nodded, a little uncertain but understanding. "I get it, baby," he said. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." April smiled and playfully added, "Well, if you feel bad, you can make it up to me by buying me some fudge after we visit the aquarium." Tim laughed and agreed. "Deal," he said. The rest of the week went smoothly, and they continued enjoying their time together, feeling even closer than before. The couple enjoyed their trip by riding horses and hiking in the mountains. They had a picnic at a spot called the Chimney Tops, where they saw more animals than they expected. They also visited some fun tourist attractions, including a funny haunted house in Gatlinburg. This place surprised even Tim, who usually stayed calm. When he looked at a chandelier from a balcony, it tipped slightly, making him feel like he was going to fall. That little dip startled him for a moment. April, who often got scared by spooky things, took great delight in teasing Tim about his reaction. While in Gatlinburg, the Masons tried some moonshine and bought a few jars of flavored ones to take home. April also discovered sweet muscadine wine from a nearby place, so they packed a couple of those bottles too. They enjoyed a variety of tasty foods, like saltwater taffy and many flavors of fudge. To their surprise, they spent more money than they thought they would on shopping and souvenirs. In the evenings, they made good use of the hot tub, relaxing together. They found that being away together helped them feel close. Tim had a little worry about whether April still liked playful banter about other people, but that worry went away quickly. On Wednesday night, April brought up a young man who had sat with them earlier that day, sparking some playful conversation. As the week continued, Tim realized that April liked talking about attention from others, and she enjoyed feeling confident in her own skin. However, she wanted to keep those conversations just for them and not let them mix with their daily lives. Once Tim understood her feelings, everything became clearer. Before they knew it, Saturday had arrived, and their trip was coming to an end. While packing the cabin, Tim and April talked seriously about staying one more night in a nice, affordable hotel in Pigeon Forge. They didn't want to rush back to an empty house. For the first week after Matt left for college, the couple enjoyed their trip. It helped them forget about the changes at home, but once they returned, they knew their house would feel empty without kids. Since neither wanted to drive for over 4 hours home on a busy day, they decided to stick to their original plan. Leave on Saturday and take Sunday to relax before the work week. April mentioned she wanted to stop at one last shopping center in Gatlinburg before heading home. Tim agreed and started loading the car while she got ready. When April stepped out of the bedroom, Tim was taken aback. Her curly hair bounced around her shoulders, and she wore a white blouse that was stylishly open at the top, showing a hint of soft green underneath. Her short black skirt fit her nicely and highlighted her long legs. Tim was speechless, and April just smiled playfully as she headed to the car. As they walked, he noticed her silver earrings. He knew they often meant she was feeling playful. At the shopping center, April seemed more interested in having fun than shopping. She often bent down to adjust her shoes, especially when a young man was nearby. The couple spent about 3 hours exploring various shops, with April stopping frequently to fix her shoelaces. She caught the attention of several young men during their shopping trip. Tim found himself watching their reactions, amused yet slightly overwhelmed. By early afternoon, the couple felt it was time to head home. They carried their purchases back to the car, loaded everything up, and started the drive. April's eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief when Tim mentioned her little performance in the shops, but she pretended not to know what he meant. Even though she acted coy, he could see she was excited. But all he could do was smile and focus on the road ahead. Instead, he promised himself that he would deal with that problem once they got home. As they neared home, the topic of dinner came up. After a week of eating out, neither Tim nor April wanted takeout food. They decided to quickly grab some groceries instead. For dinner, they chose chicken breasts, potatoes, onions, and broccoli. They agreed that Tim would marinate and grill the chicken while April prepared the side dishes. Once they parked in the garage, Tim started on the marinade while April brought in the cooler and opened a bottle of wine. Tim wasn't into wine, so he chose to sip some apple pie moonshine as he worked. April had already enjoyed 2 big glasses of wine, half the bottle, and she was becoming more playful in her responses to Tim's light teasing about her earlier behavior. The more she joined in on the fun, the bolder Tim's comments got. Eventually, April thought about skipping dinner altogether. She went to take a quick bathroom break just as Tim came in from putting the chicken on the grill when they heard a chime from the alarm system letting them know someone had disarmed it. "What the heck?" Tim said, moving toward the living room. He felt a warm, happy glow from the moonshine as he approached the front door. In the living room stood Malik, with a backpack over his shoulder. "Mr. M?" Malik asked, looking a bit unsure. "I thought you weren't coming home until tomorrow." It hit Tim then that he hadn't actually told Malik when they would be back. Many people would take the whole weekend, so the young man's confusion made sense. Just as Tim was about to explain, April came in from the bedroom. She looked at Malik, then at Tim, puzzled. "Malik thought we'd be home tomorrow," Tim explained. "I didn't mention that we always planned to come back tonight, so he showed up to house sit." April nodded, understanding. Malik, looking a bit nervous, said, "I guess I should go home then. Thanks for the food this week. Those freezer pizzas were great. Oh, and the fence is done except for the gate. I planned to get up early tomorrow to finish it before you got back." Tim looked at April and then back at Malik. "Why don't you stay for dinner, Malik? We aren't having freezer pizza, but I've got plenty of chicken on the grill, and if I know April, she's making lots of sides. After a week of just me and my thoughts, it would be nice to have some company. And I can grab my wallet to pay you for house sitting, too." April frowned slightly at her husband, but then turned to Malik with a warm smile. "Of course, we have plenty of food. You are welcome to join us." Malik looked a bit uncertain, but he returned her smile. If you all are sure, then thanks," he said cheerfully. Malik headed back to the living room while Tim and April walked toward the kitchen. April raised an eyebrow and gave her husband a look that said, "Are you serious?" Tim just grinned and shrugged as he went outside to check the chicken. "Malik, why don't you set the table?" Tim heard his wife say as he closed the patio door. After turning the chicken on the grill, Tim went back inside. He heard a clatter in the kitchen, followed by a soft expression of frustration from April. As he stepped inside, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. Wouldn't it be funny if he walked in to see April leaning down, just like the night before Matt left for college? A few steps later, Tim stopped in surprise. April was bending over by the table, reaching for something on the floor. Malik stood a few feet behind her, looking intrigued. Tim felt a rush of emotions. It was hard to ignore the situation. As Tim stood still, hardly breathing, April dropped to her hands and knees and moved closer to the ground, still searching. When she did this, her skirt shifted slightly. Tim felt a bit lightheaded, realizing both he and Malik were watching. Malik, despite being just a few feet away, seemed completely captivated. Tim felt like he needed to say something or intervene, but struggled with what to do. Finally, April made a soft sound of success and stood back up, holding what she had found. Both Tim and Malik seemed stuck in their spots, but when she turned around, she just smiled, seeming completely unaware of the moment. "I found a measuring cup," she said, showing it to them. Tim nodded, somewhat confused. "Is the chicken almost done?" she asked, seemingly oblivious to their reactions. Tim replied, Yeah. 2 more minutes and it should be ready to bring in," he said. "Great," April responded with a smile. "That should work out well," she said to Malik, as if she hadn't just noticed him staring. "Please bring the broccoli to the table. The potatoes will be ready around the same time as the chicken." Dinner was delicious, and Malik seemed really happy to be there, judging by how much he ate. He shared updates about the fence work, and the Masons told him about their trip. Matt seemed to be doing well at school, based on the messages he had sent to everyone. The sweet drink wasn't right for dinner, so Tim switched to whiskey and a diet soda, while April kept enjoying her wine. At the beginning of the meal, she seemed a bit distant, but she relaxed as time went on. Tim guessed that the third big glass of wine helped. When they finished eating, Malik excused himself to go to the restroom. Tim and April continued their conversation, but it faded as Tim looked at his wife with a playful smile. "What?" she asked. "Don't act like you don't know," he replied. "You couldn't help yourself, could you?" "I have no idea what you mean," she said with a straight face. "Yeah, right," he said. "We both know you enjoy teasing Malik. You just had to do it again." April smiled sweetly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said innocently. "Come on now," Tim grinned. "A measuring cup for fried potatoes and onions? Or was that for broccoli? We both know you didn't need the cup. You just wanted Malik to notice you more." The redhead couldn't hide her smile. "Okay, you caught me," she confessed. "I like teasing him, and it's easy to do. Since you invited him for dinner, I figured I'd have a bit of fun with it. I admit it. Are you happy now?" Tim didn't know how to reply, and he started to feel a bit anxious. It was clear that both he and April had enjoyed a bit too much to drink and weren't paying attention to what was happening around them. Malik was standing in the doorway, looking confused. Tim's surprised expression caught April's attention. When she turned to see what he was looking at, her eyes widened in shock. She started to say something, but Malik silently returned to the table and sat down, his face hard to read. The mood had shifted suddenly. No one seemed interested in eating anymore. They all pushed their food around their plates in silence for several long moments. Finally, Malik broke the silence. "So you've been teasing me, huh?" he asked, staring at his plate. "Is that supposed to be funny? Am I just a joke to you all?" "Is that it?" Tim never expected Malik to react this way. He could hear the hurt in the young man's voice. April looked at Tim, a bit embarrassed, and tried to explain to Malik. "Oh, no, honey," she said gently. "It's not like that at all. It's just that... Well..." She trailed off, feeling shy. "It's just what?" Malik asked, looking up from his plate. Tim took a deep breath, deciding that being honest was the best approach here. "Malik," he began, "we owe you an apology. April has teased you a bit because... Well..." He paused awkwardly. "It made her feel good to know a young guy like you was looking at her that way. When I realized it was nice for me too, we didn't think about how it might hurt you. We got wrapped up in our feelings and thought you enjoyed it as well, so we didn't consider any harm." As April turned red and tried to focus on her wine, Malik thought about Tim's words. After a long moment, he replied, "Well, I guess that makes sense. I'm not upset. Like I told you before, Mr. M, she is attractive. I should have known when you didn't get mad at me, and when she kept bending over in front of me. I thought I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time." It felt strange for Tim to say all of this directly to Malik, who was calmly discussing his feelings. But now that the conversation had started, the truth flowed out. April took another sip of wine, then said with a playful smile, "Yeah, you're probably not that lucky. It would have been odd for me to be pulling weeds that put me in front of you so often." Malik smiled back. "I guess so. Well, okay." He paused. "I just didn't want you both to think of me as a joke or something." Tim shook his head. "You are definitely not a joke to us, Malik. We wouldn't have asked you to house sit or help out otherwise. We just got a bit carried away and made some poor choices. We're sorry." Malik's smile grew. "Nah, no need to say sorry, it's all good." The mood in the room lightened now that everything was out in the open. As they finished their meal, Tim tried not to think about the consequences of admitting April had been teasing Malik on purpose. Soon, they finished all the food and drink. Well, I guess I'll head home after I help you clean up, Malik said. It's not like you need me to stay over tonight now that you're home. I can come back tomorrow to finish the gate. Since cleaning the table and dishes was such a quick task, Tim decided to speak up. How about this, he said. I'll go get your payment for house sitting while you both tidy up. Between the meal and getting paid, it should make your trip worthwhile. Malik smiled and thanked Tim while he and April took care of the after-dinner work. Tim realized he had misplaced his wallet after their outing. It took him a few minutes to find it under a bag he hadn't unpacked yet. Luckily, he found some cash inside. Like many people, Tim usually used his debit card and didn't carry much cash, especially since he didn't need it much in the smaller towns in the mountains. Most of the money he had taken out before the trip was still there, ready for Malik's payment. After stepping away from the bedside table, Tim felt the need to use the bathroom, so he went to the master bath before joining April and Malik again. When he returned to the kitchen a bit later, he saw that everything was cleaned up, but neither April nor Malik was there. Hearing voices from the living room, Tim walked in to join them. April smiled at him as he entered. I was starting to think you got lost, she joked. Tim noticed the rosy hue on her cheeks. She had clearly enjoyed her wine. Tim counted out Malik's cash. The young man smiled back, thanking Tim as he tucked the money away. As they chatted, April grabbed the remote and sat down on the love seat rather abruptly. When she landed, her expression shifted to one of surprise and irritation. Oh no, she exclaimed. What's wrong? Tim asked, a bit worried. I think I lost an earring, April said, puffing out her cheeks in frustration. I felt it bounce when I sat down, and I think I heard it hit the floor. With that, she set the remote down and started searching the cushions of the love seat. When her quick check didn't turn up the lost earring, she slid off the seat and looked around on the floor next to it and under the nearby side table. Tim realized that April had probably had a bit too much to drink. She had finished off nearly a full bottle of wine, and the flush on her face, the way she spoke, and how she had plopped down on the sofa showed that she was feeling quite relaxed. Aware of this, he still couldn't help but notice her slight movements. Tim noticed how April's pale skin peeked out from under her short black skirt. He glanced at Malik, who seemed equally captivated. Malik shot Tim a glance, but seeing no reaction, returned his focus to April. April bent down further to reach something under the table, causing her skirt to shift even more. Tim's heart raced, but he stood frozen as Malik slowly moved closer to her. When April and her husband didn't react, Malik stepped closer again. Tim felt torn, his thoughts urging him to stop this, but something held him back. Malik's hand slowly reached toward April. Tim's mind told him to speak up, but his body didn't move. The tension in the room grew as Malik placed his hand on April's back. She made a small sound of surprise, but didn't pull away. Feeling bolder, Malik continued, his actions gentle but firm. April seemed to be in a daze, whispering something, but her words trailed off. Tim couldn't understand why he couldn't intervene. April was acting differently than she usually would, and he felt unsettled by the whole situation. April had always enjoyed playful teasing with her husband, something that stayed between them as part of their relationship. Right? Suddenly, April let out an unexpected sound, a deep groan, and Tim knew something had changed. Tim managed to take a step forward and saw Malik standing close to April, clearly invading her personal space. Malik glanced at Tim and gave a quick smile, continuing whatever he was doing, completely ignoring the boundaries. April's reaction made it clear that she was uncomfortable, but for some reason Tim still found himself frozen, unsure of how to act. Malik spoke casually, as if discussing something meaningless, but Tim could only nod absent-mindedly, not fully processing the situation. His mind raced with confusion, struggling to make sense of what was happening. Malik seemed to believe that April wanted more, and Tim found himself powerless to stop the situation. Things escalated as Malik moved further, and Tim's heart pounded in disbelief. His thoughts spiraled, torn between panic and confusion. He didn't understand why he couldn't react, why he was stuck in place, just watching. Tim's world blurred in that moment. Fear and concern for April rushed through him. He didn't know what to do, but he knew something needed to stop. As things continued to spiral, the room felt thick with tension, and Tim was caught in a daze, desperately hoping that none of this was real. Tim's mind was racing, overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. He felt a mix of fear and anger. Part of him wanted to put a stop to everything, while another part was caught in disbelief and confusion, unable to react. The fantasies and teasing he and April had shared seemed to blur into this moment. It was all too surreal. Malik's bold actions crossed a line, and yet Tim couldn't seem to move or speak. Malik withdrew his hand, and for a brief second April seemed to react, but the situation was already out of control. Malik, without hesitation, continued, his movements unsettling. He took control of the situation, moving with confidence, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Tim, still frozen in place, watched helplessly as events unfolded before him. The tension in the room thickened as Malik took further liberties. His actions were met with resistance, but April seemed too overwhelmed to fully stop what was happening. Tim felt a wave of discomfort, a mixture of shock and disbelief, as everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Malik's confidence grew, and the room became even more tense. April attempted to speak, her voice shaky, trying to regain control, but the situation had already spiraled beyond reason. Tim stood there, struggling to process the overwhelming emotions, unable to change what was happening. It was a moment where nothing made sense, and yet everything seemed inevitable. The weight of the situation pressed down on Tim, leaving him paralyzed, a spectator to something he never imagined would happen. April felt confused, her thoughts a swirl of uncertainty. Malik kept talking, his words growing more persistent. He implied that April had been teasing him, that she had wanted this all along, and that it was something they had both fantasized about. April remained silent, unsure of how to respond. Malik's tone grew more forceful as he pushed for a response, trying to get her to admit to something she wasn't sure about. Tim stood there, frozen in disbelief, his emotions a mix of confusion and frustration. He couldn't understand how things had escalated to this point or why he couldn't stop it. He was torn between feeling shocked and upset, unsure of what to do or say next. Malik, sensing the tension, glanced at Tim and spoke again, as if to further complicate the situation. April's reaction was unclear, but she seemed caught in a moment of confusion herself, moving slightly but not fully engaged in what was happening. The atmosphere in the room became more charged, and Tim watched in disbelief as April's movements changed. It seemed like a shift in her body language, but it was hard to tell what she was thinking. She hadn't spoken clearly, and everything felt muddled. Tim's mind raced as he realized that things had gone far beyond where they should have. April's reaction, although subtle, showed some kind of hesitation, but Malik didn't stop. He continued speaking, pushing the boundaries of the situation further, insisting that what was happening had been some long-standing desire. Tim couldn't believe what he was witnessing, still paralyzed by the weight of the moment. The tension in the room reached its peak, and yet everything felt surreal, as if it wasn't truly happening. The room fell silent, the tension thick between everyone present. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the people involved and the quiet shuffling of movement. April, clearly conflicted, responded in a quiet voice, almost a whisper, but it was enough for both Malik and Tim to hear her clearly. "Yes," she said softly. Malik grinned widely, his confidence growing. "That's what I thought," he said, satisfied with her answer. He looked over at Tim, checking his reaction, but Tim remained frozen, unable to process the situation or intervene. Malik, unfazed, adjusted his position, moving with intention, taking control of the moment. Tim stood by, his mind racing. The image of Malik holding on to April, his hands gripping her firmly, was something that would stay with Tim for a long time. It was an image that would haunt him, popping into his mind unexpectedly, a reminder of the moment that felt so unreal yet deeply impactful. As Malik moved forward, it became clear that things were happening that shouldn't. April reacted with a mix of discomfort and surprise, making sounds that reflected her confusion and the overwhelming sensations she was feeling. Malik paused, letting the moment settle. He spoke calmly, telling her to relax, to take her time. The room remained thick with tension as everyone processed what was happening. Tim's emotions were a whirlwind. He felt helpless, lost in a moment he never thought would unfold in front of him. In the midst of all this, Tim's mind burned with the reality that this situation was something far beyond anything he'd ever experienced or could offer. It was a moment that he realized he couldn't change, but one that would stay with him for a long time. Tim's mind was spinning, trying to process everything happening. His emotions were all over the place as he stood there, unable to react. April seemed to relax slightly after a while, but the tension in the room remained thick. Malik continued with his actions, clearly taking control of the situation. Tim watched, feeling helpless. April tried to speak, her voice weak and unsure. She brought up the need for protection, but Malik brushed it off, casually assuring her that it wasn't necessary. His confidence was unsettling, and he continued despite her concerns. Tim, still frozen, realized that he hadn't even considered such things, something he hadn't worried about in years. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of his emotions. The whole situation felt wrong, but he found himself strangely disconnected. Malik, noticing April's resistance fading, began speaking again, his words full of taunts and pressure. The room felt heavier with each passing second, and the tension was almost unbearable. April's defenses finally seemed to break down, and she stopped resisting altogether. Her voice, once full of hesitation, now carried a different tone. She was overwhelmed, and the situation spiraled even further out of control. As everything escalated, Tim stood there, completely lost. Malik's words filled the room, but Tim's mind was elsewhere. It was a moment that would stay with him, a mixture of confusion, frustration, and emotions he couldn't quite understand. Time seemed to stand still, and the weight of the situation bore down on everyone in the room. Tim watched in stunned disbelief, trying to process everything happening in front of him. He saw Malik pull back slightly, noticing how things had taken an unexpected turn. April, who had always insisted certain things weren't real or possible, was reacting in ways that neither of them had anticipated. Malik, clearly surprised by her reaction, chuckled and exchanged a few words with Tim. It was a strange moment of casual conversation amidst everything that was happening, leaving Tim even more bewildered. April's response was a stark contrast to the person Tim thought he knew, and he struggled to understand it. As Malik continued, things intensified. What had started with some level of restraint shifted, and Malik's movements became more forceful. April's reactions were a mix of different emotions, but it was clear that the situation had spiraled far beyond what anyone had intended. Tim felt a knot in his stomach as he realized just how far things had gone. April, overwhelmed by everything, seemed lost in the moment, her words spilling out without any hesitation. Tim could hardly believe what he was hearing. The confident, composed woman he had always known was now speaking with an urgency that felt completely out of character, and it shook him to his core. Tim stood there, his emotions swirling in a mix of confusion, discomfort, and helplessness. The entire scene left him feeling disconnected, as though he was watching something far removed from reality. In that moment, nothing made sense anymore, and he didn't know how to respond or what to do. The tension in the room continued to rise, and with every word spoken and every action taken, Tim felt himself sinking further into disbelief. He knew this moment would stay with him, an event that had changed everything in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Malik, with determination in his voice, said, "Now it's time for me to take control." He intensified his actions, moving with more force and speed. The sound of movement filled the room, and Malik's voice joined in as he spoke, his words cutting through the silence. He spoke without restraint, describing the moment in ways that were raw and unfiltered. He commented on how different this experience was, making comparisons that shocked Tim, who watched silently. April, overwhelmed, let out a cry as the intensity grew. The sensation seemed to take over, and she reacted to the overwhelming emotions coursing through her. Malik, however, continued, never slowing down or stopping. He kept speaking, adding to the tension in the room. With another sudden movement, April responded again, her body trembling under the intensity of it all. Her reaction was unmistakable, and Tim could see her overwhelmed by everything. Malik didn't pause, keeping his movement steady but powerful, with each action sending a clear message of control. As the scene unfolded, Tim noticed the change in April's body language, realizing just how deeply things had progressed. Malik's voice echoed in the room, expressing surprise and admiration at how far things had gone. Tim, though shocked, felt a strange mix of emotions. Malik's comments about April, though crude, contained an odd form of admiration, and Tim couldn't help but feel a conflicted sense of understanding. April, always someone special to him, was now being admired by someone else, even in such a confusing moment. As the situation built toward its climax, Malik became more focused, indicating that the end was near. Tim's mind raced, suddenly worried about what might happen next. The uncertainty of the moment gripped him, unsure of whether Malik would remember to stop and what the consequences might be. Tim stood behind April, his mind still processing everything that had happened. As he prepared to join her, she spoke softly, her voice filled with exhaustion. "Be gentle, please. I'm still a bit sore." Her words hit Tim hard, reminding him of everything that had taken place. The thought of what she had been through with Malik left him feeling a mix of emotions, part disbelief, part tension. When he moved forward, he expected things to be different, but as he continued, April responded, showing she was still there with him, even after the whirlwind of the night. Though it wasn't as intense as before, April found a rhythm, and they connected. It was a quiet moment between them, and Tim felt relief wash over him when she reached her own satisfaction, not once, but twice. Later, they both collapsed into bed, emotionally and physically spent. The night had been long and sleep came quickly. The next morning brought a bit of grogginess. April noticed the mess on her pillow and laughed. "I forgot to take off my makeup," she said with a light-hearted chuckle. Tim, already in motion, stripped the bed and tossed the sheets into the laundry. It was a slow start to the day, but as they made breakfast together, the events of the previous night weighed heavily on them. They noticed Malik outside working on the gate as promised, quietly keeping his distance. Sitting across from each other at the table, the unspoken tension grew until Tim finally broke the silence. "We need to talk about last night." April's expression tightened for a moment, but Tim quickly added, "I'm not upset and this isn't about blame, but what happened was big, and we need to make sure we're okay." April looked out the window for a moment, then back at Tim with a faint smile. "Yeah, you're right," she agreed. Tim smiled back, relieved. "I'm glad we're on the same page. That was something. Let's not pretend. It was intense. We've talked about it, fantasized about it, but the reality was a lot more than I expected, at least for me." April sighed, shaking her head slightly. It was intense, Tim. Amazing, honestly. Is that what you wanted me to say?" Tim smiled gently. "I'm glad you feel that way, but I just wanted to be sure we're okay. That you're okay." At this, April's expression softened, and a hint of worry crossed her face. Tim paused for a moment, thinking about how April seemed worn out after what had just happened. She had settled on the couch, and it was clear she needed a break. Instead of pursuing any other ideas, he hiked up his pants and signaled for Malik to do the same. Malik glanced at April wistfully, but then did as he was told. After finding his shorts, Tim spoke to April gently. "Hey, you take a moment to rest. I'm going to walk Malik out." April nodded, a bit tired. Malik grabbed his backpack, giving April one last look before stepping out with Tim. Once they were outside in the warm evening air, Tim closed the door and turned to Malik, making sure to meet his gaze. "Malik," he said, "we need to chat before you go home." "Okay," Malik replied. Tim took a breath. "You know, April and I had talked about stuff like this before, but we never really planned on doing it, you understand? It was just talking." Malik raised an eyebrow, a small smile on his face. "I don't know, Mr. M. Your wife seemed pretty into it. That felt more than just talking to me." Tim chuckled a little. "That's fair, but it changes things. It wouldn't be good for us if others found out about it. You know." Malik jumped in. "If people found out that you let a young kid be with your wife." "Exactly," Tim sighed. "It's not even about race, it's about age. And you're friends with Matt. I really doubt Matt would take it well." Malik laughed softly. "Truth. Matt might be really mad, and his friends would probably help him out too. There's no point in talking about it, Mr. M." Tim felt relieved. "Good. I'm glad we're in agreement. Just to be clear, though, nobody can know about this. I mean nobody. No funny looks, no hints. We have to keep this private. If anyone tries to bring it up, we will deny it completely." Malik nodded, understanding. "I get it, Mr. M. You guys have always been great to me, not just tonight. I wouldn't want to cause any trouble. I know a good thing when I see it. I'll be fine. I promise not to say a word to anyone." He smiled. "I'll keep it cool." Hearing Malik's words put Tim at ease. He extended his hand for a shake, and Malik accepted it. "Just one thing," the young man suggested. "You both seemed to have a great time. I did too. Do you think there might be a chance?" He hesitated. Tim frowned. "Maybe. Possibly. I'm not sure, Malik. I never thought we would actually try that for real. Sometimes, before, April has felt very uncomfortable about talking openly and would avoid the topic for days. She might decide that it was just a one-time thing and that's it. If she does, you need to respect her choice, okay?" Malik nodded seriously. "I understand." "Good," Tim replied. "Look, she and I will talk it over. I think it's best if you don't bring it up for now. We'll let you know if there's a chance for something similar in the future, all right?" "That's fair," Malik agreed. "Cool. Good night, Mr. M." Tim shook his head. "Good night, Malik. Text me your work hours so I can pay you afterward." That night felt different. When Tim came back after seeing Malik out, April, who usually liked to look nice, was still curled up on the love seat, looking relaxed and carefree. As Tim entered the room, a strong atmosphere lingered around them, and April greeted him with a dreamy smile. Tim thought she would go to the bedroom and change, or at least adjust her outfit. Instead, she stayed right there, seemingly content after her unexpected time with Malik. Tim had anticipated a serious conversation with his wife after he returned home, but seeing her in such a relaxed state made it hard to focus on anything serious. What was happening to him? Why couldn't he think clearly? Tim reached for her hand and she took it. He helped her stand up and shared a deep kiss with her, feeling a mix of emotions in that moment. The air around them felt charged, and suddenly having a serious talk seemed less important. As they walked hand in hand towards the bedroom, April giggled. "I never did find my earring," she admitted. When they reached the bedroom, there were no formalities. April took off her clothes and climbed onto the bed. Tim felt compelled to speak in a playful tone. "So you finally did it," he said. "You went ahead and did what you wanted to do." Tim's mind was racing with worry. What if April was fertile? Why hadn't he spoken up or done something earlier? He felt torn between confusion and panic as the situation unfolded in front of him. Malik, still focused, made his final move. Tim watched as the young man pulled back at the last moment, stepping away from April. Malik's expression showed a sense of relief and satisfaction as he finished, stepping back to catch his breath. April, meanwhile, seemed exhausted. She slowly sank to the floor, curling up as if to catch her own breath and process everything that had just happened. Concerned, Tim moved to her side, kneeling down to check on her. "April, are you okay?" he asked softly. She opened her eyes slowly, her gaze unfocused at first. But as she saw Tim, a small smile appeared on her face. "Yes," she breathed. "I'm fine. That was intense," she admitted. Tim felt a wave of emotions hit him, both relief and confusion. He realized that April had experienced something deeply personal, something he hadn't fully expected. At the same time, his own feelings of discomfort and confusion weighed heavily on him. April, sensing his tension, looked at him with a knowing smile. She noticed Tim's obvious frustration and tension and gave him a gentle smile. "You look like you could use some help," she teased softly. She leaned toward him, her tone warm and reassuring. Tim was caught off guard by the sudden change, but after everything that had happened, her words offered him a moment of connection and comfort. Tim groaned, feeling the tension release in a wave of relief. It had been a long, confusing day, but in that brief moment, he felt a sense of grounding again. As the room settled into quiet, Tim glanced over at Malik, who had already begun to get dressed, his expression satisfied but now distant. The tension that had filled the room was finally dissipating, leaving Tim with a strange mix of feelings he wasn't quite ready to understand. "Of course I'm okay, baby. Why wouldn't I be?" April said, her tone softening. "I know things happened, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. I love you so much. I thought you felt the same." Tim stood up from the table, wrapped his arms around her, and spoke softly in her ear. "No, I'm not upset with you. You mean everything to me. I just wanted to make sure we're good." April relaxed in his embrace. "We are good. I really love you," she replied sincerely. He held her tightly. "I love you too," he said, smiling at her. "And I thought it was amazing to see you so full of life in that moment. It really took my breath away." April turned a bit red. "Okay, stop," she said with a shy grin. "Yes, it was. Quite an experience." Tim chuckled lightly. "I promised not to say anything too bold, but I'm glad you thought to be cautious during it all. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. I'm sorry if I worried you." She shrugged a little. "Don't think too highly of me. I was a bit tipsy and it was overwhelming. It was hard to keep track of everything. I thought it would be better to be safe." Tim nodded with a slight smile. "That makes sense. You did great." Then he grew more serious. "Honestly, during that moment, I was worried about things happening. Part of me was curious about it too." April looked surprised. "Oh, wow," she said, her eyes wide. "That's interesting. I guess I had some of those thoughts too." Tim laughed softly. "Seems like we might both be a little more adventurous than we thought." He noticed that April was looking out the back window. "I spoke with him last night when I walked him out," Tim said. "I believe he'll keep this a secret, but he did mention he'd be open to doing it again if you wanted. I told him that was up to you, and he seemed okay with that." April nodded, though she seemed a bit lost in thought. "Okay," she replied quietly. After breakfast, Tim went outside to check the fence while April finished unpacking. Malik waved to Tim from where he was working. Tim waved back before Malik returned to his tasks. As Tim walked around the fence, Malik seemed to ignore him completely. The boy was acting just like he always did, as if nothing unusual had happened around them. It was easy to see where Malik had worked. The older boards looked much grayer than the new ones that still needed more time in the sun. Malik hadn't just replaced a few pickets. Some of the wooden rails were worn out, and he had removed the old ones and put in new ones properly. Tim was genuinely impressed. The young man had done an outstanding job, even better than a professional fencing company might do. This made Tim smile. He thought Malik deserved some extra money for his hard work. When Tim went back inside, he found April looking unhappy in the kitchen. "The fridge is empty, the milk is old, we need everything," she said. Tim shrugged. "We've been away for a week, it's normal," he replied. "Whatever," April said. "Grab your keys. We're going to the grocery store." Tim knew better than to argue. Soon they were waving goodbye to Malik as they drove off. Tim suggested they stop by the ATM to get Malik's payment, and April thought that was a good idea. They spent an hour in the store, filling their cart fuller than Tim thought was needed, but he didn't question his wife's choices. If April thought these items were necessary, who was he to disagree? As they pushed their cart towards the checkout, a serious voice called out from behind them. "Mrs. Mason? April Mason, is that you?" April turned to see a middle-aged woman standing there with a half-full shopping basket. She was a bit shorter than April, quite thin, and had noticeable lines on her face that made her appear older. Still, she seemed confident, as if she was used to being listened to. April nodded. "Can I help you?" she asked calmly. The woman approached quickly. She gave Tim a brief glance, but clearly decided he wasn't important, focusing entirely on April. "Mrs. Mason, my name is Tamara Williams. I'm Malik's mother," she introduced herself. April offered a small smile and a nod, while Tim kept his expression neutral. Tamara stood tall and looked at April seriously. "Mrs. Mason, I want you to know that I am aware of what you and your husband are doing with my son." April's heart began to race, and Tim started to feel anxious. How could this woman know? Why would Malik have told her anything? Why would he come to their house and act as if everything was fine? The woman with red hair swallowed hard, trying to keep a calm face. "I don't know what you mean," she replied softly, trying to ignore how dry her mouth felt. Inside, she was nervous. She knew she had to pretend not to know and maybe act a little shocked if she wanted to give a convincing response to the accusations. Malik was an adult, and people in town liked to talk. But April and Tim had not done anything wrong. After all, their actions were not against the law, and there was no real proof that anything had happened. It was his word against theirs. Tamara looked at April with a knowing smile. "There's no use in denying it, Mrs. Mason. Malik has shared everything with me," she said firmly. "I know what you did." Tamara stepped closer to April, making Tim widen his eyes. Was she about to confront his wife right here in public? But then Tamara opened her arms and pulled April into a hug. "Thank you," she said softly. "I really appreciate it." Both Tim and April were taken aback. April wanted to respond, but struggled to find the right words. She fumbled. Tamara let go of April but stayed nearby. "Malik told me about the work he did on your fence and watching over your house," she explained. "Last night he came home thrilled that you had paid him well, not just for the work, but for using your groceries and staying in your home. Then you even invited him for dinner." She shook her head with disbelief. "That boy will work hard if someone gives him a chance. He's trying to save money for college, but I can't help him since his father passed away. You are so kind, Mrs. Mason." She turned to Tim. "And you too, Mr. Mason. Thank you both." Somehow, April found her voice again and smiled at Tamara. "Malik is a good young man," she said simply. "He has always been respectful and helpful. Matt really likes him. When he mentioned needing to earn some money and we needed help, it just made sense. We're happy to help him, and really, he has been helpful to us too. With the kids moved out, the house feels empty sometimes. It's nice to have someone here." Tamara beamed. "You may try to downplay it, Mrs. Mason, but you have done a lot for my son, and I truly thank you." The two women shared another hug before Tamara continued with her shopping while the Masons finished checking out. Later, as they put the groceries in the back of the car, Tim smiled at his wife. "It's not like he isn't helping us out," he said with a funny grin. April looked at him with a sharp gaze. "You better put the card away if you know what's good for you," she warned. She held his gaze for a moment, then they both burst into laughter. When the Masons arrived home, they saw Malik had fixed the gate. "Hey, Mr. M," he called out as they got out of the car. "I'm almost done with the gate adjustment. Just need to clean up my tools and some scraps." Tim gave him a thumbs up. "I checked out your work this morning," he said. "Great job. When you're finished, come inside and I'll pay you." Malik nodded, and Tim and April took the groceries inside. As they unpacked, April asked, "What's your next project for him?" "I was thinking of having him replace the floor in the mudroom, but painting the garage might be a better idea." "What do you think?" he replied. "Painting sounds good. He can handle that with little help. I guess you'll stop by Lowe's tomorrow?" she asked. Tim nodded. "I think so. If he wants the work," he trailed off. April chuckled. "I doubt that will be a problem," she said. Once they put away the groceries, they started making lunch. A few minutes later, they heard the back door open, followed by a knock. "Mr. M," Malik called. "You said I could come in after I was done?" "Yep, we're in the kitchen," Tim answered. Malik entered, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's hot out there," he said with a tired smile. "But the fence is done. The gate works great, and I replaced all the bad boards. We're all set." Tim nodded happily. "Awesome job, man. We really appreciate it." He picked up an envelope from the counter. "You told me you worked 33 hours before today. I think you added 3 hours today, right?" Malik agreed. "Okay," Tim said. "Let's say that's 36 hours total, so it will be $750, just to make sure we're not shorting you." Malik smiled as Tim handed him the envelope. He peeked inside and looked puzzled. Mr. M? I only see hundreds in here. Maybe you counted wrong?" Tim smiled back. "Nope, it's counted right. There should be 9 bills. That includes a little bonus from us. You did such a great job, you didn't need help, and everything looks top-notch." "You deserve it." Malik's smile was so big it seemed like it could light up the whole room. "Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. M, Mrs. M." Time returned the smile. "No, thank you. We really appreciate all your hard work." He paused for a moment. "Want to join us for lunch? I was just about to cook some burgers." April glanced at her husband but didn't say anything. Malik's smile faded slightly as he looked a bit shy. "I'd love to, but I'm a bit sweaty from working outside. I don't think you'd want me around while you're eating." There was a brief silence after he spoke. April rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Malik. You can take a quick shower and wear some of Matt's old clothes. They might be a bit big, but it's just lunch. You don't need to dress up." Malik laughed. Okay. Thanks, I'll go freshen up." As he left the kitchen, Tim gave his wife a teasing look, and she pretended not to notice. By the time Malik finished showering, lunch was almost ready. He walked back into the kitchen in loose clothes that were a bit too big on him. Matt had some comfy shorts I borrowed, but his shirts are too large, Malik explained. That's fine, Tim reassured him. It's just us and some burgers. During lunch, Tim mentioned the garage painting project. It's a big job. There's no real damage, but you'll need to remove any peeling paint and re-caulk around the doors. Then, everything needs to be taped, primed, and painted. It's not hard, but it takes time and careful work, he said. And don't forget my flowers, April added. Please don't step on them. Malik nodded seriously. Yes, ma'am, I'll be careful. He looked at Tim. But I'm in. I really appreciate you finding more work for me. Tim nodded. Like we said before, you need some money and we need help here. It's good for both of us. Plus, I won't have to hire a handyman who might not do a good job. Malik gave a serious nod. I'll make sure to do a good job for you, Mr. M. Tim smiled. We trust you, Malik. I'll stop by Lowe's on my way home from work tomorrow. You can start on Tuesday or whenever else works for you, okay? Malik grinned. Deal. The rest of lunch was filled with light conversation. Malik shared stories about his work schedule, his grandmother's famous cookies, and a cool sports car he had seen recently. Tim and April talked about what colors to paint the garage. They decided on beige with off-white trim because April wanted to make sure the colors didn't take attention away from her flowers. Tim and Malik went over what supplies and tools they would need for the project. April mentioned that she wanted to start a Netflix series with Tim later that night, while Malik expressed excitement about watching the Braves game on TV. Eventually, Tim stood up from the table and went to put away the leftovers. As he did this, April stacked the dishes and carried them to the counter to wash them and load the dishwasher. When Tim closed the refrigerator door, he stopped and looked again. April was loading the dirty dishes, leaning forward to fit a plate into the dishwasher. Then, slowly, she stood up to check another plate before leaning forward again to load it. Tim felt a rush of energy and his heart started to race. He glanced at the kitchen doorway and saw Malik standing there, watching with a surprised look on his face. Tim had gotten used to April joking around with Malik and other young guys, but this felt different. Normally, April would pretend to be busy while showing off a bit. This time, though, it seemed more obvious. After what happened the night before, when Malik had figured out that April was teasing him on purpose, things felt different now. When April had acted playfully, Malik had touched her, which led to more. Now, April stood up again and looked at the last plate before bending down once more. She took her time doing it. Tim noted that she seemed to be taking longer than necessary to load the dishwasher, and it felt like she was crossing a line from playful teasing to something more serious. Tim could tell that Malik felt the same way. Malik looked at Tim, then stepped into the kitchen, clearly affected by what he was seeing. Malik moved confidently toward April with a smirk on his face. Tim stood frozen, watching as the young man closed the distance. Time seemed to slow down as Malik reached out toward April. Just before he could make contact, April turned to him and started to speak. Malik, what do you think you're... Her words trailed off into a groan. Without hesitation, Malik skipped any subtle actions. Instead of testing the waters as he had the previous night, he immediately placed his hand on April, catching her off guard. Tim watched as Malik moved his hand lower, clearly making April uncomfortable but strangely unmoved by the situation. April didn't pull away or tell him to stop. She seemed to let the moment unfold, even though it confused Tim beyond measure. For a moment, Tim couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Malik continued to act as though he was in control, confidently pushing boundaries while Tim stood quietly, unsure of what to do. April didn't resist, her body reacting automatically, though her mind seemed somewhere else. Malik's actions felt far too bold, as though he had taken a place that wasn't his. Malik gently pulled April to her feet, turning her to face him. His expression was one of determination as he leaned in and kissed her. Tim saw April's vacant look as Malik's lips met hers. She responded almost instinctively, though her thoughts seemed scattered. The kiss deepened as Malik leaned in more, leaving Tim standing in disbelief. April appeared to regain some clarity after the kiss ended. Malik, she began, trying to speak again. I think we should stop. But her words were cut short, as Malik again pressed his hand against her, ignoring her weak protests. He leaned into her neck, kissing her skin gently while she glanced around the room. When April's eyes met Tim's, she seemed uncertain, her expression almost pleading for help. Worried about her, Tim stepped closer. Malik briefly glanced at Tim, but seeing no direct objection, continued his actions. Tim leaned in toward April and whispered, "Are you okay? What do you need me to do?" April looked at him, her voice shaky. I'm not sure," she stammered, clearly unsure of herself and the situation. April let out a soft sigh, her eyes half closing, clearly lost in the moment. Tim leaned in to kiss her, and she responded warmly. As they shared the kiss, Tim couldn't help but notice that April's reactions weren't solely due to his actions. He knew Malik's presence had stirred something in her, adding to the tension in the room. When the kiss ended, Malik smirked. "I didn't get to see everything last time," he said with a confident tone. Without hesitation, he reached for the hem of April's blouse, and Tim watched, surprised, as she raised her arms and allowed Malik to slip it off. Tim was used to April being strong and assertive, but seeing her in this more passive role shook him. Malik grinned as April stood in her light pink bra, but he wasn't satisfied. "Take it off," he said, his voice firm. To Tim's surprise, April didn't hesitate. She unclasped her bra and let it fall, revealing herself. Malik's face lit up, clearly pleased. "Wow, even better than I imagined," he said with a grin. Malik leaned in and kissed her skin. But Tim's mind was elsewhere, wrestling with how much things had changed. He watched as April responded, her hands gently resting on Malik's head, seemingly lost in the moment. Before Tim knew it, they were in the master bedroom. He couldn't quite remember how they had moved from the living room, but now they were here. It was as if Malik had taken control of the situation, and both April and Tim had followed without question. Malik removed his shirt, revealing his slender frame. For a brief moment, Tim found the whole thing absurd, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. Malik's confidence seemed to draw everyone in, and April's reaction was one of surprise as Malik continued to take the lead, guiding the strange turn of events that had pulled them all into a place they never expected to be. April stared in disbelief, her voice barely a whisper. "I knew it was big, but I didn't realize just how big until now." Her expression was a mixture of amazement and uncertainty. "How did you even manage to fit all of that inside me?" she asked, still in shock. Malik grinned confidently. "You were ready for it, trust me," he replied. "And you will be again." He casually climbed onto the bed, settling in as though it was his own. "But before anything else, why don't you come over here and help me out a little first?" Without hesitation, April moved toward him, seemingly drawn in by his command. She climbed onto the bed, Malik lounging comfortably among the pillows. Tim watched as his wife moved closer, reaching out tentatively with wide eyes. "It's so thick," she muttered in awe. Her fingers barely wrapped around the object of her focus, and she seemed astonished by the sheer size. Malik, however, wasn't interested in her commentary. He gently guided her head down toward him, his hand pressing lightly on her hair. She understood the unspoken request and moved forward. Tim, standing nearby, felt conflicted emotions but couldn't seem to look away. April, now focused, followed Malik's cues as best she could. Malik closed his eyes, clearly enjoying the moment, while Tim stood by unsure of what to do. He eventually decided to join in by removing his own clothes, trying to find a way to connect with the situation. As Tim watched, he noticed April's subtle movements, her body responding to the tension in the room. Without thinking too much, he climbed onto the bed behind her. Gently, he touched her, feeling her shift beneath his hand. Soon enough, it became clear that the situation was escalating. Tim carefully pulled down her shorts, revealing how affected she was by the moment. It was obvious that she was lost in the intensity of the situation. He hesitated briefly, then decided to continue, guiding her out of her clothes as they all moved forward into this confusing and charged moment together. The room was filled with unspoken emotions, and everything seemed to move without pause, as though each action was pulling them deeper into something none of them fully understood. Tim couldn't resist anymore, gently touching his wife, his mind clouded by everything happening. April responded with a soft sound, though distracted by the overwhelming situation. Tim's mind raced, but before he could act further, Malik interrupted, pulling away. "That's enough for now. Malik said, his voice casual. I don't want to finish too soon. Lay down. April, not aware of Tim's thoughts, shifted and lay back on the bed. Her body language showed her willingness to continue. Tim, not wanting to be left out, moved closer, wanting to stay connected to what was happening. Malik looked down at her with a grin, contrasting their appearances, April's pale skin against Malik's darker tone. He commented crudely, but April seemed focused elsewhere, her eyes fixed on him, anticipation clear in her expression. The tension in the room grew as the situation developed further. Tim could see the intensity in April's eyes, and it unsettled him. Malik, sensing her anticipation, responded with confidence. All right, no need to wait anymore, he said, as though this was all just routine. Malik moved closer, positioning himself in front of April. Tim watched as Malik continued, seemingly in control of everything. April's expression changed slightly, showing a hint of worry, but Malik quickly reassured her. Don't worry, I've got this, he said, his voice steady. Tim tried to stay composed, but Malik's confidence in the situation was overwhelming. When Malik casually assured, You don't need to worry, I'll pull out again, Tim knew it was time to speak up. Actually, Tim interjected, his voice a bit shaky. April and I talked earlier. She's in the safe part of her cycle, so, it's fine if you don't pull out. Malik raised an eyebrow, grinning wide. You mean you want me to finish inside her? Tim nodded, still uncertain about what he was feeling. Yes, that's what we want. Malik's grin grew even wider. You won't have to tell me twice, he said with enthusiasm. I've never done that before, so I'll make sure to do it right. Tim's emotions were all over the place. Confusion, discomfort, and something else he didn't quite understand. The moments that followed felt like a blur. Malik moved confidently, as if nothing could stop him. This time it seemed like April was more accustomed to everything, and Tim, now much closer, had a clearer view. Though the scene was intense, it was the little details that stuck with Tim. April's expressions, her reactions, the way she held on to the bedspread. These were all things that left an imprint on his mind. The physicality of it all was secondary to the way she seemed so lost in the moment. The sound of her voice, the way she seemed consumed by her own feelings, echoed through the room. For Tim, it wasn't just the sight, but also the atmosphere. The air felt thick with emotions, and everything seemed to build towards something overwhelming. April's reactions, her expressions, her words, made it clear that she was reaching heights she hadn't before. And then it happened. April's body tensed as she was overcome with a rush of emotion. Malik moved with confidence, clearly more familiar with the situation than the night before. As he continued, it seemed like he reached the limit of what he could manage. But after a few moments, something shifted, and April reacted intensely. Her body tensed, her face flushed, and for a moment, Tim worried something might be wrong. But then it became clear she was experiencing something overwhelming, a rush of emotion and sensation. Malik, always vocal, encouraged her through it. Yeah, you got this. Feel it. Let it take over. His words, though casual, pushed the moment further. Tim watched, torn between feelings of discomfort and something else he couldn't quite place. Tim realized in that moment that Malik was bringing out something in April he had never seen before. It was hard for him to acknowledge, but the reality of it was undeniable. His wife was experiencing something deeply personal, something she hadn't felt before. The conflicting emotions made it difficult for Tim to even process what was happening. He couldn't stop himself from feeling a sense of pride as he saw April embrace the intensity of the situation. She was beautiful, and the way she responded was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The moment seemed to stretch on, each second filled with more tension and emotion. It became hard to keep track of everything. The sounds, the feelings, the atmosphere in the room, it all blurred together in Tim's mind. Time passed and everything grew more intense until Malik's pace started to change, signaling that things were nearing an end. I'm close, Malik said, his voice urgent. It's almost time. April's expression shifted. She looked excited, but also a little unsure. Her gaze moved to Tim, her eyes filled with something complex. She seemed to want to communicate something. Maybe concern, maybe anticipation, but it was clear she was caught in the moment. There was no mistaking the raw emotion on her face, an undeniable mixture of excitement and vulnerability. Tim's mind was racing with conflicting thoughts. What if April was wrong about her cycle? What if this wasn't the safe time she thought it was? Malik was about to finish, and Tim couldn't help but worry about the consequences. He wondered if it was worth the risk, despite the intense emotions both he and April were experiencing. The thought of what could happen if Malik's actions led to an unexpected pregnancy crossed his mind, and it filled him with uncertainty. Tim felt torn. Part of him wanted to tell Malik to stop, to pull away before anything irreversible happened, but another part of him, driven by some inexplicable force, wanted to see things through to the end. His mind swirled with conflicting desires, unsure of what to do. Before he could decide, the moment arrived. Malik, clearly at his peak, cried out, his body tense with emotion. April responded, overwhelmed by the intensity of it all. Her face showed a mix of emotions, surprise, excitement, and something more profound. She let out a series of cries, clearly caught up in the moment. Tim watched, unable to look away. The scene before him was surreal. His emotions were tangled, but he couldn't help but be drawn into the intensity of it all. It was an experience unlike anything he had ever imagined, and it left him feeling both bewildered and strangely connected to the moment. As things settled, Tim expected Malik to pull away immediately, but instead the young man lingered, clearly enjoying the moment's aftermath. April, still recovering, giggled softly and gave Malik a gentle push, signaling that it was time to move on. Malik, understanding the cue, eventually stepped back. Tim couldn't resist looking closer, taking in the scene before him. Everything had changed in that moment. April, Malik, and even Tim himself were left in a state of reflection. What had just happened would stay with them for a long time, a complex and confusing experience that none of them would easily forget. As Tim watched, he noticed the scene unfolding before him with mixed emotions. April, lying there, quietly commented, "I can feel it," as she became aware of the sensation. Soon after, a noticeable shift occurred as everything began to settle. Tim's mind raced. Thoughts of what had just happened filled his head. He questioned himself and his decisions, wondering how he had ended up in this moment. His heart pounded, and he felt an odd mix of regret and confusion. But despite it all, there was something that kept him deeply connected to the experience. His emotions were tangled, but he couldn't deny the strange pull that held him in place. He glanced at Malik, who was still at the foot of the bed, showing no signs of leaving anytime soon. His expression hinted that he might be interested in staying longer, perhaps even hoping for more. But Tim, feeling the need for privacy with April, made his decision clear. "Malik," Tim said, his voice steady but firm, "that was incredible. But right now, I need some time alone with my wife." Malik seemed to understand without protest. He nodded, getting dressed. "I get it. I'll see you both later," he said before heading out, leaving Tim and April alone. As soon as the door closed, Tim felt an overwhelming urge to connect with his wife in a way that surprised even him. He moved closer to her, sensing that this was a moment where words weren't needed. April, still catching her breath and processing everything, hadn't expected Tim's next move. When she realized what he was doing, she initially tried to dissuade him, telling him it wasn't necessary. But Tim, filled with emotion, was determined to be close to her. His actions were driven by something deeper, a need to reconnect after everything that had happened. April, at first resistant, eventually gave in to the moment. The two shared an intimate connection, as if trying to rebuild something that had been shaken. For them, it was a chance to find balance again after a night that had thrown everything into question. In the quiet aftermath, they embraced the closeness that followed, allowing the intensity of the evening to fade into the background. The weight of their emotions, while still present, began to ease as they shared this quiet moment of reconnection and understanding. Tim and April lay together in silence, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. They didn't speak much, but their connection was clear as they held each other close, sharing the quiet moment. They spent the next hour simply resting, letting the weight of what had happened settle between them. The rest of the day passed without much discussion, but after a night to process everything, they sat down for a serious conversation the next evening. It was a moment for them to understand their emotions and come to terms with the experience. April reassured Tim that she loved him more than anything, and while the teasing and fantasies were exciting for her, she never intended to hurt him. Tim admitted that while it was difficult watching her find joy in someone else's actions, it was also strangely exciting for him. They both realized that the experience brought up complex emotions, but they were open with each other about how it made them feel. They agreed that if they were to explore these experiences again, it would need to be under clear boundaries. Malik had to respect those boundaries, and everything would happen with mutual understanding. When Malik returned to work on the garage a few days later, Tim had a conversation with him, setting firm guidelines. Malik, to his credit, respected everything Tim laid out and didn't push any boundaries. That summer unfolded in a way none of them had expected. April's concerns about timing passed without issue, and the Masons continued their lives with a new understanding between them. Malik became a regular presence, helping with various home projects like painting the garage and working on the landscaping. He proved to be hard-working and reliable, earning a fair amount for his efforts. Throughout the summer, April and Malik maintained a respectful relationship, with clear boundaries always in place. Malik never made any inappropriate advances or comments and respected April's space. The arrangement worked smoothly, and the Masons were able to navigate this new chapter in their lives with trust and communication. When April gave Malik the signal, his attitude would shift immediately. He became more assertive, giving her instructions and taking control in ways that seemed far from his usual demeanor. The normally independent and confident April appeared to be under his influence, willingly following his lead without hesitation. It became a regular occurrence. Almost every week, April would give Malik the go-ahead, and each time he would leave, their connection would leave a strong impression on her. Malik often made comments about how being with her had changed him. "You're spoiling me," he said one day in June. "I've never been with anyone like this, and now I know what it's like without barriers. It's like it doesn't feel right unless it's real and all the way." Tim and April understood the feelings behind his words, though they never said so outright. At one point, Tim jokingly called April out for getting too used to their situation, and instead of being defensive, she laughed and agreed. For them, there was something about the experience that felt deeply thrilling, a boundary-pushing excitement that they couldn't fully explain. Even on rare occasions when their time together didn't follow the usual routine, the dynamic remained. Tim and April's relationship began to evolve, with their time together growing stronger. After Malik left, Tim would reconnect with April, reinforcing their bond. These moments helped build trust and intimacy between them in ways they had never explored before. Their relationship grew more open as they discovered new things about themselves and each other. They communicated more, talked about their fantasies, and even explored new experiences. The two became closer than ever, with a level of trust that deepened their connection. April kept a close watch on her schedule to ensure there were no risks involved, and though they knew it was important to be cautious, the excitement of exploring these new boundaries was undeniable. That summer became one of the most memorable times for the Masons, filled with growth and exploration. They shared intimate moments and learned more about each other than they ever had before. But as all good things do, the summer eventually drew to a close. As the weeks went by, the focus of their conversations with Malik shifted. More and more, they talked about his future, his college plans, the money he had saved, and the classes he was looking forward to taking. It was clear that this chapter of their lives was coming to an end, and they all prepared for what lay ahead as the summer faded into memory. As July went on, the plans started to take shape. Malik's mother would take him down on August 9th, with the semester starting on the 11th. This leave him a day to settle in, explore the campus, and find his way around. Tim shook his head at how much school schedules had changed. He complained that the fall semester didn't really start in the fall, but he knew they couldn't control the calendar. April asked him to come over on the 8th to say goodbye, promising a nice dinner and a chance for them to all spend time together one last time. Everyone understood that they wouldn't just be watching Netflix or playing games during that final gathering. There was an unspoken agreement that they wanted to send Malik off with a warm farewell. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon on August 1st when Tim opened the door to find Malik standing there. Tim frowned when he saw the teen. "What's up, Malik?" he asked. "I didn't think you could work on the gutters today." It had been raining all week, and they expected Malik to have finished the job by now, but the weather had not been friendly. The teen shook his head. "Nah, Mr. M," he replied. "I know I can't get up on the roof today. It's too wet. That's kind of why I came over," he explained. Tim looked confused. "How so?" he asked. "I wouldn't let you get up there and risk getting hurt. We talked about that with the rain. Sorry, I don't have any other work for you right now. Everything else is outside work, too." The young man nodded. "No worries, Mr. M. I didn't come to look for more work. I came to say goodbye, actually." Malik paused, looking unhappy. After a moment, he added, "I'm leaving in the morning." Tim's face showed confusion. "I don't understand. Today is August 1st. I thought your mom was driving you down next Monday. Why are you leaving a week early?" Malik frowned deeply. "My uncle got a construction job close to the school. He asked my mom if I could help this week. The pay is really good, and it means my mom doesn't have to take a day off work to take me." Tim nodded. "That makes a lot of sense. April and I are happy for you, but we will miss you. You've done some great work." Tim paused, feeling a bit awkward. "And we've enjoyed getting to know you." Malik managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. M. You and April have been good to me, and I appreciate it." Malik stayed there for a moment, glancing past Tim into the house. Is Mrs. M around? Is April home?" he asked a bit awkwardly. "I'd like to say goodbye to her if I can." Tim frowned slightly. "Yes, April is here. She's in the middle of a workout right now, though, and doesn't like to be interrupted." April had always been particular about her exercise. She preferred not to have anyone watch or talk to her while she was doing yoga or Pilates at home. However, she seemed fine with others seeing her during gym classes, which Tim never fully understood. Taking a deep breath, Tim made a decision. "Why don't you come in and have a soft drink?" he suggested. "We can chat for a bit, and you can say goodbye to April once she finishes." Malik nodded in agreement, and the two went inside, taking a seat in the living room and giving April some space while she worked out. They talked for about 10 minutes, discussing school and Malik's plans. Soon they heard a voice from down the hall. "Who was at the door?" April called out. Tim glanced at Malik before replying. "It's Malik. He's leaving for school early and wanted to say goodbye." A moment later, April appeared in the hallway. She was wearing a tank top and shorts that suited her well, with a slight flush on her cheeks from her workout. As she often said, Pilates was a tough challenge for her, but she appreciated the strength and flexibility it helped her develop. April looked confused. "What do you mean goodbye?" she asked. "You aren't leaving for a week. We plan to have a nice dinner next Sunday to say farewell." Malik shrugged and shook his head. "My uncle got a new job near the school. He asked my mom if I could work with him this week. I'd make good money, and it means she won't have to drive me to school. So I have to go." Malik didn't seem thrilled about the change. April's lips pressed together, but her voice was gentle. "It's disappointing to miss the farewell dinner, but life can surprise us with changes. We will miss you, Malik." She stepped forward and gave Malik a warm hug. "Good luck. We wish you the best," she said softly. Their hug lasted longer than usual for a goodbye. When April finally pulled away, she only stepped back a little as Malik kept his hands on her waist. "I was wondering," Malik said quietly. Malik hesitated, then spoke quietly. "If we could, maybe one last time." He trailed off, breaking the boundaries they had carefully set over the summer. Until this moment, Malik had always respected the rules. He never asked or hinted at anything unless April gave a clear sign that she was open to it. It kept things straightforward, maintaining the balance between their family life and the unusual dynamic they had developed. But now, Malik was stepping outside those boundaries, and Tim wasn't sure how to react, nor could he guess how April would respond. April seemed caught off guard by Malik's suggestion. She didn't respond right away, and her hesitation was clear. Malik, interpreting her silence as approval, took a step closer. His hand gently rested on her back before moving lower to rest on the fabric of her form-fitting clothes. April frowned slightly at the contact, but she didn't pull away, leaving the situation uncertain. "Malik," she murmured, "I'm not sure this is a good idea. Maybe we should." Her voice trailed off. unsure of how to continue. Instead of stopping, Malik leaned in and kissed her. At first, April's body language was tense, as though she might step back, but then something changed. Tim watched as his wife went from being hesitant to slowly returning the kiss, her initial resistance fading. It was clear that she was still processing everything as it unfolded. Malik's hand moved gently over April's clothes, and the atmosphere shifted. The tension in the room was palpable as Tim observed the scene, unsure of how to feel but knowing things were escalating. Malik spoke again, his voice low. "You know you want to feel it one more time before I go," he said quietly. "I've been waiting all week, just for you." April's soft reaction made it clear that the moment was moving forward, and Tim realized that they were heading down a path they couldn't turn back from. After a few more moments of quiet intimacy, the three of them moved to the master bedroom, leaving behind any lingering hesitation. There, Malik and April continued their exchange, with April's quiet, uncertain sounds filling the room. Malik gently kissed her neck while holding her close, and their actions made it clear that this final encounter was inevitable. The boundaries they had once respected had shifted, but for now, they were all moving forward, caught in the intensity of the moment. April looked at Tim, her expression a mix of emotions that caught him off guard. Her wide eyes seemed to plead with him, leaving him unsure of how to respond for a moment. Worried, Tim moved closer, gently wrapping his arm around her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, trying to read her emotions. April's breath hitched, and she hesitated before answering. "Oh, Tim," she whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty and need. I want this, but..." She trailed off, clearly torn. Tim's own emotions were swirling. Over the summer, he had struggled with how to handle these situations, but the more they had explored these boundaries, the more he had grown to accept it. The initial confusion and discomfort had lessened, and what remained now was a strange mix of excitement and curiosity. He glanced over at Malik, who waited patiently, then turned his attention back to April. With a quiet understanding, Tim reached for the bottom of April's tank top, pulling it up and over her head. He moved with purpose, unhooking her sports bra and gently removing it as well. Malik smiled but remained calm, sensing the tension in the room. April, caught up in the moment, shifted slightly, showing her uncertainty through her body language. Her breathing quickened, and it was clear she was ready to move forward, even if she had hesitated earlier. Tim couldn't help but notice how different this moment felt from the others they had shared that summer. More intense, more emotional. Tim carefully helped her out of her shorts, moving slowly, wanting to savor the moment. This felt like a turning point for all of them, and he wasn't sure if they would ever experience something like this again. Every movement seemed charged with meaning as the three of them silently acknowledged the weight of the situation. As Tim knelt down to help April, he took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. They had explored many things over the summer, but something about this time felt final, like they were reaching the end of a chapter. Tim had grown familiar with moments like these, but the tension still struck him deeply. As he carefully pulled down April's shorts, a familiar scent filled the air, catching him off guard. It stirred something within him that he couldn't quite explain, a mix of emotions that surged through his mind. As the fabric slid lower, Tim couldn't help but notice how different April seemed in that moment. Her body language showed just how intense her feelings were. He saw the changes in her, and it reminded him of how much the moment meant to her. Any lingering doubt about her emotions quickly disappeared. Tim realized just how affected she was, and it left him feeling both connected and uncertain. "Oh, wow," Tim whispered, his voice full of surprise as he finished removing her shorts. "You're really feeling this." Malik, standing nearby, made a sound of agreement. Tim looked up and saw that Malik had already discarded his own clothes, ready for what was about to happen. April reached out instinctively, seemingly caught up in the intensity of the moment, and Malik responded by gently guiding her. He turned April toward the bed and positioned her, preparing for what would come next. April moved without hesitation, showing that she was fully present and engaged, her actions clear and intentional. Tim, watching closely, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "You ready for this?" Malik asked quietly, even though it was clear that April was. Her body language and the emotions in the room made it obvious. Still, Malik wanted to hear her say it. After a brief pause, April nodded and spoke softly, her voice full of anticipation. "Yes, I'm ready." Malik gave a satisfied smile, and the room seemed to shift as they moved forward together, everyone caught up in the gravity of the situation. Tim stood by, his mind swirling with thoughts, knowing that this was a moment none of them would forget. Malik, just as he had done before, held April's hips firmly and positioned himself with determination. "Here it comes," he said, his tone steady as he moved forward. At first it seemed like nothing was happening, but soon April let out a sound, one Tim recognized from their past experiences that summer. It was a mix of discomfort and pleasure, something that had become familiar to both of them. The space between April and Malik gradually closed as he carefully continued, taking his time. A few moments later, April was clearly overwhelmed, trying to adjust. It always took her some time to become accustomed to the situation, but she never hesitated, showing her determination to push through. Her soft, breathy words echoed in the room, revealing her focus and energy. After only a few minutes, the intensity of the moment grew, and Tim could see how much April was immersed in the experience. Malik, focused and in control, maintained a steady rhythm, moving at a pace that kept everything balanced. Tim stood nearby, observing the scene unfold, conflicted by the mixture of emotions he felt. Watching April like this was difficult, yet there was a strong sense of connection that had formed between all of them over the summer. The emotions in the room were thick with complexity. As things escalated, Malik adjusted his pace, and Tim could tell that April's reactions were becoming more intense. Her body seemed to react almost instinctively, each moment filled with emotion. Malik kept pushing forward, adjusting to April's cues as the moment reached its peak. Then with one final movement, it seemed as though everything came together, and April responded with an overwhelming wave of emotion. Her body trembled, and the room filled with her cries as the energy of the moment surged through her. Tim stood by, quietly witnessing the culmination of all the moments they had shared over the summer. It was a powerful reminder of the complicated journey they had been on, one filled with emotional highs and lows, and now reaching its end. As Tim felt his emotions rise, he pulled back, trying to regain control. He still wasn't used to seeing the way his wife responded so strongly in these moments, but he had learned to manage the complex feelings it brought. Malik held himself steady, maintaining a careful rhythm, clearly focused on April. He smiled confidently, sensing the effect he was having on her, almost as if he reveled in it. April, typically so composed and thoughtful, was clearly overwhelmed by the intensity of the situation, her breath coming in short gasps as she tried to regain control. "You like that, don't you?" Malik said softly, his tone filled with certainty. "You want it as much as I do?" April, struggling to speak, could only respond with short breaths. "Yes, it's so much," she murmured, her voice filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. But then something shifted, and she looked up, her expression changing as she realized something important. "But wait," she said between breaths. "Malik, you need to stop. It's not the right time." Malik didn't seem to understand right away and continued at his pace, clearly caught up in the moment. April, trying to regain her voice, attempted to speak, but her words were drowned out by the intensity of the situation. Finally, she managed to catch Tim's eye, her gaze filled with a silent plea for help. Tim stepped forward quickly. "Hold on, Malik," he said, his voice firm but calm. "I think she needs a break." Though disappointed, Malik stopped, pulling back as April collapsed onto the bed, catching her breath. Tim knelt beside her, his concern evident. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. April took a few moments to steady herself before turning to him. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice soft. "It's just, today's not a good day." Tim frowned, trying to piece together her meaning. "Is it risky?" he asked, thinking back. April nodded. "Yes, it's the worst day. I didn't realize how much I'd lose control. I can't risk it today." Malik, overhearing, grew concerned. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, his confusion clear. April sat up and gave him a reassuring smile. "No, it's not you," she explained. "It's just today isn't safe. I'm ovulating, and if we continue, it could lead to something we're not ready for." Malik nodded, finally understanding as Tim exhaled quietly, relieved. The situation had been intense, but April's calm explanation helped bring clarity to everyone. April gave Malik a hesitant glance as he replied, "I can be careful. Really, I will." Still unsure, April frowned. "I don't know, Malik. This is the riskiest time for me." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "It's not just you. Things get so intense for me, I don't know if I could stop either." She shook her head, clearly conflicted. Malik, trying to reassure her, smiled. "Don't worry, I'll just pull back. Like I said, I'm not ready to be a dad at 18. April looked at her husband, her uncertainty evident. "What do you think, honey?" she asked, seeking his guidance. Tim felt a lump in his throat. Rationally, he knew they should stop. The situation had already gone far enough, and there was always a chance that things could spiral out of control. He had seen how easily April could lose herself in moments like these. Was he really prepared to trust the self-control of someone so young, especially on such a risky day? But alongside these rational thoughts, Tim wrestled with the darker side of his mind. Part of him, though he would never admit it, was drawn to the idea of pushing boundaries. Even though the thought of something unintended happening filled him with anxiety, there was also a fascination with seeing how everything played out. He took a deep breath, trying to balance reason with the emotions swirling inside him. "It's your choice," he said gently. "Malik has been responsible, but you're right. Today is risky." April still looked unsure, so Tim continued. "I'm not going to lie," he added quietly, his hand gently resting on her thigh without him fully realizing it. "You know how much I enjoy seeing you happy and comfortable, how much I've enjoyed watching you both connect. But this decision needs to be yours." April closed her eyes for a moment, her mind racing through everything. When she opened them again, her expression was calmer, though still filled with mixed emotions. "All right," she whispered. "We can continue, but carefully." Tim nodded in understanding, the tension still hanging in the air as they all agreed to move forward cautiously, aware of the boundaries but acknowledging the complexities of the moment. Malik smiled widely as he moved closer to the bed. April's legs shifted open as he approached, and Tim gently withdrew his hand from her. Without hesitation, Malik positioned himself, and with a determined push, April let out a soft groan as he settled into place. For the next few minutes, Malik maintained a steady rhythm, his movements controlled and purposeful. April reacted with bursts of pleasure, but after her second wave of intense sensation, her body seemed to relax, as if she were completely spent. Meanwhile, Malik continued with focused energy, seemingly determined to reach his own peak. Tim could tell that Malik was starting to show signs of strain, signaling that the moment was nearing its end. As Malik lowered his body onto April, the shift in position seemed to intensify things, and the sounds in the room grew louder. April, regaining some of her energy, lifted her hand to the back of Malik's head and pulled him into a deep kiss. Tim observed quietly, noticing how connected the two seemed in the moment, their movements synchronized and in tune with each other. Malik eventually pulled away from the kiss, breathing heavily. "I'm almost there," he warned, his voice urgent. April's hands gripped Malik's hips, holding him close as their connection deepened. Her focused gaze on Malik showed how lost she was in the moment, completely in tune with the intensity of the situation. "I'm right at the edge," Malik said, his voice strained. "I need to pull back if you don't want it to go too far." Tim knew what was happening and understood the need to step in, but he felt frozen, unsure of how to act. He should have said or done something, but he found himself still, unable to break the moment. In the end, Malik followed through on his word. He managed to pull back just in time, carefully removing himself from the situation as Tim let out a relieved breath. Malik had respected the boundaries, and the tension in the room slowly began to ease. The older man let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding as he watched the scene before him, his thoughts swirling in confusion. April then moved closer, her lips meeting Malik's. She shifted her body slightly, pulling him back into her embrace. It was an intense moment, and the young man felt overwhelmed by the sensations. As the experience reached its peak, Malik struggled to hold back, feeling the rush of his emotions. His body reacted, and the connection between the two was undeniable. The intensity of the moment left them both caught in a whirlwind of feelings. April, too, was overtaken by the emotions. Her body trembled, feeling the rush of energy leaving her breathless. She clung to the moment, completely immersed in the overwhelming sensations. Meanwhile, Tim was frozen in place, grappling with the emotions running through him. He struggled with the thoughts swirling in his head. The weight of the situation was hard to bear, and he found himself lost in the complexity of it all. Tim's mind raced with questions about what might come next, as fear and uncertainty clouded his thoughts. The idea of change in their lives weighed heavily on him. He wondered how he would handle what the future might bring, caught between his emotions and the reality before him. With that, Tim groaned, unsure of what was happening, as the intensity of the moment lingered in the room. Tim was overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. His mind was racing, filled with a mix of emotions that he couldn't quite understand. April finally caught her breath, gasping for air as her body trembled with the aftermath of her experience. Slowly, her breathing returned to normal, and she lay still, the moment passing. Malik, visibly uneasy, withdrew, clearly considering the weight of what had just happened. As he moved, a flood of thoughts hit Tim, but he felt disconnected, unable to grasp the reality of the situation. Malik glanced at April with concern, and then, without a word, began to gather himself. Tim knew what he should have done. He should have helped April, should have made sure they handled the situation responsibly. But reason had already left him, and in that haze, all logic seemed lost. Instead of stepping back and thinking clearly, Tim found himself drawn further into the moment. Unable to resist the emotions swirling inside him, he moved closer to April, overwhelmed by everything. His actions weren't guided by thought, only by a pull he couldn't explain. As he helped his wife regain her composure, the weight of everything that had happened hung in the air, leaving him with a sense of confusion and uncertainty. Tim realized he was no longer in control of his own feelings. But as the night went on, he knew that this moment would stay with him, leaving him questioning everything that had led them here. Tim sat quietly, overwhelmed by the intensity of everything that had unfolded. April, exhausted, rested beside him, her breathing finally calming as the room settled into an uneasy stillness. Malik had left earlier, not quite sure what to say after everything, but grateful for the summer that had passed. Tim found himself deep in thought, trying to make sense of it all. The weight of the moment, of everything that had led to this point, left him questioning decisions he had made and what the future held for his relationship with April. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent to the changes that had taken place behind closed doors. Tim knew that somehow they would have to move forward, but how that would look was still unclear. Tim returned to the bedroom to find April lying quietly, staring at the ceiling, lost in her thoughts. The air was heavy, a mixture of emotions and memories from the intense day. As he approached, April looked at him, worry etched on her face. "Do you still love me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "I feel like I lost control. I don't know why I let everything happen." Tim gently lay beside her, pulling her close. "Of course I love you," he reassured her. "We've talked about this. We've explored it together. You got caught up, but that's okay. We were both there." April sighed, her gaze softening but still conflicted. "But I let it go too far. I couldn't stop myself." Tim stroked her cheek gently. "It's okay. We've always been open about our fantasies. Today got intense, but it's nothing we can't handle." He paused, searching for the right words. "You don't have to carry guilt. We're in this together." April leaned in, kissing Tim gently. Though there were still questions in her eyes, the weight between them began to lift. They stayed close, finding comfort in the quiet connection they shared. Naturally, it wasn't long before he gently embraced her, and they shared a quiet, intimate moment, finding solace in each other's presence. They remained close, lost in their thoughts, reflecting on the day's emotions. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.